comment, and I said, nah, they're gonna like me, I think, and they're gonna know a lot more about the foundation and the work that we do. So anyway, we're live now, so I'll let you take over, Yusuf.
Good. Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Marie-Christine Pierre et je siège au conseil d'administration de Dialogue NB. Je suis également avocate chez Actus Law Droit à Moncton. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à notre dialogue public Démantèlement du racisme dans les écoles du Nouveau-Brunswick. Qu'est-ce qui doit changer? Offert en partenariat avec l'Association africaine du Nouveau-Brunswick et Battle of the Arts NB dans le cadre du mois du patrimoine africain. J'ai le plaisir d'animer ce dialogue aujourd'hui en compagnie de Yusuf Shir, président de l'Association africaine du Nouveau-Brunswick. Hello, Yusuf. Welcome.
Thank you, Marie-Christine. So we'll just dive into this. So I'll just start with thank you again. And racism in Canada schools is well documented. It began with the establishment of residential schools all over Canada in the 1980s and implementation of racial segregation imposed on non-white students, racialized segregation of Black people, Indigenous people, and Asian people. This is a reality. It's also very present in New Brunswick schools. Our schools are hostile place for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized students. In our work at NBAA, New Brunswick African Association, we hear from many students and families frustrated at being unknowingly pushed into academic program below their capacity and only discovering this their academic path in grade 12 when it's too late to do anything about it. They end up graduating with the equivalent of certificate of participation, which is not the high school diploma they believe they were working towards. As of now, New Brunswick African Association has over 35 families who have all shared the same exact experience, and the number is growing. How is this okay? We also hear from the African youth who complain about being penalized and punished at much higher rates than their white peers. These students and families do not see themselves represented in the schools, so they do not have the opportunity to find guidance and support from individuals who understand and the experience they are facing. Racialized and marginalized students must always leave pieces of themselves outside the school in order to attempt to fit in and to be tolerated. Racialized students and their family are subjected to overt and subtle everyday racism from their peers, administrators, school staff, and educators alike. When the school is an unsafe place to be, how can students be expected to learn, to grow, contribute? Things must change in this discussion we will have today. In acknowledging that the land from which I'm joining you is traditionally unceded and unsurrendered territory for the Woolstock. This territory is covered by the treaties and peace and friendship, which the Woolstock, the Mi'kmaq, and the Passamaquoddy people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of land and resources, but in fact recognized Woolstock, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy titles as established the rules of what to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I'm grateful that we can all virtually join here today. I'm grateful to the First Nation people who share the ancestral land with us all. I invite everyone to write in the chat which unceded territory are you joining us today. Marie-Christine?
Thank you, Yusuf. Je vous encourage également à utiliser le document partagé en ce moment dans la section clavardage qui vous indique comment faire la reconnaissance des territoires non cédés correctement. We thank Dr. David Purley, past director of the Mi'kmaq-Wolastoqey Center at UNB and director of Dialogue NB for sharing this resource for us today.
For those, yeah, go ahead. For those of you watching from Facebook, please note that the translation is not available future through Facebook Live. It's however available within the webinar here today. We're also recording this dialogue so that viewers can watch it in a future date. Thanks to Rogers TV, who will be also streaming these dialogues on their channels. Marie?
On behalf of Dialogue NB, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our commitment to the struggle against systems of oppression that have resulted in profound iniquities and against the denial of self-determination rights. We are working actively to deepen our learning at an individual level, provide learning opportunities about anti-racism and decolonization to the sector, and to develop partnerships with organizations serving and led by underrepresented groups. J'aimerais maintenant partager avec vous quelques informations au sujet du fonctionnement. Tout d'abord, la traduction est disponible pour ceux qui sont à l'intérieur du webinaire. Vous n'avez qu'à activer la fonction interprétation qui se trouve au bas de votre écran. Les directives sont mentionnées dans le clavardage également. Comme ceci est un webinaire, il est normal que vous ne voyez que les panélistes et les animateurs. Vous pouvez participer activement tout au long du dialogue en commentant dans la fonction clavardage ou encore en écrivant votre question à l'aide de la fonction Q&A, foire aux questions. Il est possible de communiquer votre question à une personne spécifique ou encore avec tous les panélistes. Ceci s'applique également dans la fonction clavardage, alors que vous pouvez choisir tous les participants et panélistes. Vous pouvez choisir qu'ils voient votre commentaire ou seulement les panélistes. Et maintenant, je passe la parole à nouveau à mon co-animateur pour l'introduction des panélistes aujourd'hui. Youssouf.
We are joined here today by our diverse panel who have taken their time to share with us their knowledge and experience. Please join us in welcoming Honorable Dominic Cady, Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development, Melanie Nagbe, the students. She will be joining us. Graham Nickerson is a historian, academia, and a researcher. Felix Ndeginyuwako, past student. Ivan Agustin, Director of Education for Elispogo Tok First Nation. Francis Muganda, Community Advocate. Last but not least, Raymond Times Board Member of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Thank you all for being here today and sharing with us.
Perfect. Thank you, Youssouf. Allow me to introduce the format of this dialogue today, in case this is the first time that you attend one of our dialogues. Le but de nos dialogues est d'obtenir une meilleure compréhension sur un sujet et non pas d'atteindre la résolution. Si à la fin de ce dialogue, vous avez l'impression d'avoir appris quelque chose, alors notre mission est accomplie. Sachez également que nous publions des rapports sur chacun de nos dialogues et que ceux-ci sont partagés avec les parties prenantes et disponibles au public via notre site Web. En ce qui concerne le déroulement d'aujourd'hui, nous allons poser des questions aux panélistes afin qu'ils et elles puissent nous situer par rapport à leur positionnement sur le démantèlement du racisme systémique dans les écoles du Nouveau-Brunswick. Par la suite, nous aurons assez de temps pour répondre à quelques questions et nous entretenir avec les participants. En tout temps, par contre, les participants dans le webinaire peuvent se prévaloir de la fonctionnalité clavardage pour commenter. Veuillez respecter les principes suivants qui s'appliquent ici de la même manière que sur nos plateformes de médias sociaux. Nous invitons chacun de vous à faire preuve de respect et de courtoisie dans la publication de vos commentaires. Les éléments suivants ne seront pas tolérés et seront systématiquement effacés. Les commentaires diffamatoires, abusifs et obscènes, les déclarations discriminatoires fondées notamment sur le sexe, la religion, la nationalité ou l'orientation sexuelle, et les propos incitant à la haine ou à la violence. À toi, Youssouf.
Thank you, Marie. Today, we will dive into a reality of systemic racism in education system and explore what work is being done to change the system and what must still be done to achieve real change. Fundamental work must be undertaken by the decision makers at all levels of this complex system. With this indispensable involvement of the entire community, our guest will dive into a discussion on systemic racism in our education system and share their knowledge and meaningful strategies for dismantling racism. Question for panelists. Marie-Christine?
Certainly, and I see that Melanie just joined us. So welcome, Melanie.
Welcome, Melanie.
Pour la première question, Hi. La première question aujourd'hui, d'après vos expériences, vos lectures et votre compréhension du racisme systémique au Nouveau-Brunswick, comment diriez-vous qu'il se manifeste dans les écoles? Based on your experiences and understanding of systemic racism in New Brunswick, how would you say it manifests in schools? Félix en premier. Félix?
You're muted. There we go.
Great. So Félix, based on your experiences and understanding of systemic racism in New Brunswick, how would you say it manifests in schools?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
I just have my audio really kind of running late.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can hear me now though.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I will speak on my own experiences and my friends. When I was in school, in high school, specifically Leo Hayes, there's a time that I was in history class and was speaking about slavery. And when we're speaking about slavery, the teacher asked a question, and he asked, "What do you think about slavery? What's your opinion on slavery?" And a student stood up, and he said, "I think slavery was great, and my opinion, blacks should still be slaves because they don't contribute anything in our society." And I looked at the teacher hoping he would say something, educate something, at least get the opportunity to educate at that right moment. And the teacher said, "Okay, I understand. Sit down." The next person stood up and said exactly the same thing. And I was so disappointed to hear that the teacher did not even make a comment at that. And that made me feel like it made me feel uncomfortable in the class. It made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. It made me feel like I was scared. I was like, maybe at some point they're even gonna attack me or something, because the teacher just said nothing about it. And that was just sad to hear, and just sad to see the teacher ignore something like that. And also talking about racism in schools, I got here when I was 17 years old, couldn't really speak English, but I was learning very quickly. So when I got to classes trying to understand, and they would just tell me, "You just go in, you sit in English class and you'll be fine." And I was asking for like mathematics, because I understand I can, it doesn't need English, but they will only tell me to go to English class. And eventually when I started speaking English, they'll just tell me, you just go sit in English class. You're probably gonna become nothing but a roofer. That's what you're gonna do for the rest of your life. And that really broke my heart. And every day I would just pray and say, I wish I could, I could prove them wrong, And not just that, if there's a friend of mine who were going to a course in time, a teacher told him that he's not allowed to go to the gym because monkeys don't go to the gym. And that's just sad, seeing those things coming from the teachers, the people that should educate people and the students. It kills hope. It feels like there's no hope, and that's just sad. But that's all I have to say for that.
Thank you, Félix. And now we'll move on to Melanie.
Yes.
Based on your...
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I've experienced a lot since I came here, but I didn't have the courage to say anything because I was new in this country and I don't know anything until I was in 12th grade. I've realized that the teacher don't care most about the Black student that comes when the student comes, they always tell them, you know, you're a newcomer, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. They'll give you those fifth grade stuff for you to do the whole semester. And they won't actually teach you what you actually need to know. They only give you some fifth grade math. That's what I was doing when I was in eighth grade, because I already passed seventh grade in Africa. I just needed more to get more educated in like my seventh grade. I needed some credit on it. So I was just there and they told me that, oh, you know, you just have to do the fifth grade stuff. They gave me like a bunch of fifth grade stuff and I was just doing it. And until I reached to ninth grade, they put me into a higher level, but they only gave me the seventh and fifth grade paper for me to do it. And I also listened to the teacher and do nothing. So it was going on until grade 11. Then I realized that this is not okay, right? It's really not okay. I cannot be doing this. And I decided to stop. And they were like, oh no, you will never be anything in your life if you don't do what we tell you, right? So I literally stopped doing it until they were like, okay, well, in 12th grade, that's when they put me in a higher level. And they expect me to like not do the work that they give me to do. And they always tell me, you know, Melanie, I don't think you'll be able to do this, or they think that I'm not smart, or like, you know, I'll never do anything with my life, but I did pass the class, and which is really good. And, you know, I figure out how to prove them wrong, but still it's messed up. And when you talk to the people, there's this man where you go to him and you tell him about what college you want to go to or what university to go to. He's not encouraging you. He's telling you like, oh no, you have to go marché de travail. I don't know how to call it. Do you know marché de travail? I don't know what they call it in English, but yeah, they tell you to go there, and he tell you like, oh, the level where you are is not okay. You have to go to marché de travail or blah blah blah. You cannot be successful, you know.
Yeah.
That's what he keep telling us, and it really brought us down most of the time. A lot of Black students had to leave the school. They had to move to another school. And I have this one friend, he had to completely forget about school and focus on what he really wants, because school was not this. The École Sénane was not helping him with anything that he wants. Even co-op, I decided to take co-op, and co-op also, it was really bad for me because they'll tell me to have my own idea, and they'll tell me to be on the laptop the whole 24/7 to bring any ideas or to help the kids that does not know French and English. I will spend my whole time writing, doing stuff for them, and then when I show them, they'll be like, "Oh yes, we're gonna use it," and they never do. At the end of the school year, I had to burn them.
Yeah. Thank you, Melanie, for sharing that. This is what the newcomers or African students, they go through the school. So this is what Felix was echoing, the same situation and Melanie is echoing. So we'll go to Ivan Augustine.
Thank you very much. Just my experience as a First Nation Mi'kmaq kid has never been in school in a very welcoming environment. This building right here was the Indian Day School that I attended when I was a kid. So we were never really welcome in the school. You know, we were pretty well taught how to sing and pray. We were never really engaged in the academics of learning. And a recent picture that was shown here of the Indian Day School with a principal standing in front of the door and all the kids around it. And this photo was probably from the mid-1960s. And when I looked at that picture, I remember that door, but I never remember anything inside that was positive experience for me. So, and this is our school right here in the First Nation community, the Indian Reserve. So that was a very difficult time, never feeling welcome, never having a positive experience. I don't remember a Valentine's Day. I don't remember an Easter. You know, those were kinds of things that were not part of the program for us. Going into the public school system, again, there we never really felt welcome. Was always felt always alone. We had you know, we weren't a big population of First Nation kids going to those schools. We were always kind of like singled out as troublemakers. That would be our middle school experience. Then at the high school level, of course, we did a lot of standardized testing in grade 9, grade 8 or grade 9. And in my discussion with the guidance counselor was very clear that I did not know how to work with my head. I knew a lot more to work with my hands, and steered me away from the things that I wanted to do. However, I resisted that, and I felt that I could do more. And yes, I did. Took some time and struggled to convince the administration at the time that I could be in these programs that I want. And I proved that wrong because they had me picked as someone that will not do well, that will not succeed as I go along in my career as a student. Now that's my experience as a student going to school. How racism manifests itself today in the role that I do as director of education is just an example that I want to give with the recent public school here in the last 5-6 years ago, maybe less, where they found racist literature. A little girl from our community found racist literature within the school library, and we don't know how long that racist literature was there. And the little girl brought that racist literature to the parents here in the community, and it started an uproar about it, that there's racism, systemic racism in the schools, and on and on and on. But that was 3-4 years ago. And I'd like to just to say on the positive side that I believe with the work that Minister Cardi and I and First Nations have been doing, that we've opened the doors a lot about addressing systemic racism in the provincial schools. And we still have a lot of work to do. And I think I'll get into some more of these as we go along with some of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. We'll go next to Raymond.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. First off, let me put this disclaimer out. I'm from Nova Scotia, born and raised, but the experiences that I've heard here is no different than what's taking place here. And I also want to let everybody know that I sit in the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nations community of Millbrook. Now, schools, the experiences that we're sharing here, I think we can all relate to because we're telling our own personal stories. I look around at everybody here, and I guess I'll call myself one of the older generations. Everybody still says I look 50 years old. I'm not going to tell my age. But when I went to school, the signs were up for the bathroom, color white. Never really changed until the late 60s. We'd be in geography class or history class, and they talk about Africa and whatever. They would make the black kids stand up. And when they were talking about Africans, they talked about the hair, the lips, the color of the skin, and we were second-class people. Racism, there was no support from teachers. I shouldn't say no support. I mean, we are going to sit here and we're going to criticize the system, but there's good people in the system. They just need leadership. We'll talk more about that later. Is it still going on today? Yeah. Yesterday I dealt with a family member of mine who lives in a small town. Graham he'll know it, Stewiacke. Taking her grandkids to the bus, and other kids getting on the bus were holding bananas out, calling them monkeys, and reported it. I told her to report it to everybody. Just happened, but this just didn't happen yesterday. A lot of it's been ongoing, so the first of the week we'll deal with it. And like you said, they steer us towards the labor jobs, the labor market. I left school grade 10. When I left Truro, grade 9, I went to Montreal. It was either go to Montreal, live with my cousin, try to do better, join the army, or I was going to jail because I was an angry young man. I chose Montreal. Back then in the late 60s, it was very diverse. You could walk down the streets, you know, and then things changed as what we see now. But I became a single father at age 22. When I came home with my 2 kids, met my second wife. We're a multicultural family. We now have 4 kids. My wife was at school almost every day. I drove truck every day fighting because of the racism. Now picture this, because they thought it was kind of strange. Here's a white woman with 2 black kids in the school fighting, but those were her kids. Okay, that's how I got involved. But when they got older, I wanted to make sure that they had an education. They were tried to steer them towards these, as I said, the menial stuff, the general classes. But it was my desire, our desire, they go on to university. And I could sit here and tell you 3 out of 4 of our kids got their university degrees. Our oldest daughter's a lawyer. You can go online and find her story because she was caught up in that human trafficking. We got her out of it and got her to university. She's a lawyer now with 2 law firms up in Ontario. Our youngest son, he was told in grade 7 he wasn't going to amount to anything. He's the regional manager for the Parole Board of Canada here in Truro. Our youngest daughter, she went off to university. She's with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission for 12 years. And 1998, when she graduated, she was the valedictorian. And you know how they love you to give those little speeches or whatever? She got up in front of 1,200 people and she sang, I believe I could fly. The tears were flowing. Everybody was saying, and you know what they said to her after it was over? You shouldn't have done that. You were supposed to just give a speech. Then left there, went on to Toronto and became the first Miss Black World Canada in the pageant. Here she is raising 2 boys with autism on both ends of the spectrum. She spoke the other day at the conference there in Toronto about what it's like being Black, raising, two boys with autism. The system's not working, and how hard it is, like even here at the school system. You talk about New Brunswick. I've been working all over. I'll finish with this part because we can talk about more later. But I've been getting calls about parents not wanting their kids to be taught by Black teachers or teachers of color. It's happening right now. But I won't get into all of that. Minister Cardi and I, we can have a chat later on. But the kids facing the racism, the teachers, they need supports, okay? It starts at the top, Minister Cardi, and it works down. We'll get into all that later. I'll finish with this with me. Age 33, I went back and got my grade 12. Then I got involved in politics, school board for 4 years in 2000. First thing that was said to me, what are you doing here? We treat all the kids the same. And I said, that's your first mistake. No two kids are the same. And all kinds of battles. I could spend 3 hours sitting here talking to you about that, but I'll stop that. Then I got into municipal politics for 12 years and all the changes that took place. But again, we'll get further into those discussions, but I just want you to know that our personal experiences are no different. What's happening in New Brunswick is no different to what's happening here. But in all my literature and I've done my homework, spent 4 hours researching and whatever, there are some things that are working here that maybe could be incorporated in New Brunswick. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Raymond, for sharing your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you. We'll go with next will be Graham Nickerson.
Hi, everybody. Yeah.
Hey, Graham, I can hear you.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would, although it didn't happen to me personally, going through school, I had family who reported the same thing of being streamed into vocational. They would be called into the principal's office and told, okay, well, your only realistic options are to go into vocational school. And of course, the vocational school students were treated as second-class citizens or stupid or whatever. And so I ended up going to trade school, but I chose to do that. But mostly because there wasn't, at that time, I'm 52, so there really weren't a lot of positive academic role models at that time, even in the 80s. So that's my experience. I won't say I didn't encounter any racism, but I would say that I encountered systematic racism in that I lived within a very structured. Nova Scotia has it's old time race. I'm from Shelburne, Nova Scotia, and it's old time racism in which you're in a box and you don't know that you're in that box. You're just, that's where you are and your path is set for you and you fit in with a preconceived set of expectations in which when you encounter white people, you say Mr. So-and-so, and when they talk to you, they use your first name. And I don't live there anymore. I don't live there anymore for a reason. Shelburne is still a segregated community. There's still overt racism within the community. And my wife is white, and we left because she didn't like it. And we just didn't want to have that conversation every time we went out in public. So in terms of education, my experience in New Brunswick has been fairly positive. We have run into racism in Leo Hayes, where my oldest son attends, and a blackface image of him was circulated around the student body and we believe it's in retaliation for him giving a public speaking engagement in which he called out racism. And so I would say that the main issue that I've had is that when the school guidance counselor went to deal with, we reported it and we went in, there was no transparency. We have no idea. We suspect that nothing actually happened because the student's mother contacted us later and asked us to go to a birthday for the kid who had circulated the images. And we didn't go, of course, but there just was no closure for us. And from what I hear an awful lot of lack of closure thus far. in what people are saying. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Graham. La prochaine personne, Mélanie, Francine, désolée. D'après vos expériences, vos lectures et votre compréhension du racisme systémique au Nouveau-Brunswick, comment diriez-vous qu'il se manifeste dans les écoles?
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, on t'entend bien.
Okay. Bonjour à tous. Et je voulais partager, selon moi, d'après les expériences vécues, des lectures, des compréhensions concernant le racisme dans les écoles au Nouveau-Brunswick. Et il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on a déjà constatées dans des écoles du Nouveau-Brunswick. Nous sommes des parents, nous avons des enfants, nous sommes venus avec des enfants au Canada, mais précisément au Nouveau-Brunswick. Et d'abord, les enfants, les nouveaux arrivants au Nouveau-Brunswick, ils ne sont pas pris comme d'autres enfants. Ça, c'est la première chose que de mon côté, j'avais constaté parce que j'ai passé même dans des écoles, là où mes enfants étudiaient, il y avait même des élèves que moi, j'ai rencontrés dehors. Les autres sont dans des salles de classe, mais les enfants sont dehors. Souvent, je leur posais des questions, des curiosités, comme toi, tu es dehors. Non, l'enseignant m'a dit que les matières que les autres font, moi, ça ne me correspond pas, je suis incapable de les faire. Ça m'a choqué en tant que parent. Ça faisait mal. Même les parents à la maison ne le savaient pas. Il y a même des parents jusqu'à présent, ils ne savent même pas si leurs enfants n'étudient pas. Des fois, tu rencontres des enfants circuler dans des couloirs, ils sont dans la cuisine, ils sont, je ne sais pas où. Donc, ils sont exclus, premièrement. De deux, c'est le fait qu'ils ne sont pas évalués quand ils arrivent à l'école. Quand l'enfant n'est pas évalué, donc il est déconsidéré. C'est comme s'il est considéré comme il ne peut rien dans sa vie. C'est comme s'il est incapable de quelque chose. Il n'est pas faire quelque chose de bon. Ils sont toujours écartés, nos enfants à l'école. Mais pour le savoir et le détecter, il faut aller dans des écoles. Parce qu'en tant que parents, on rencontre beaucoup de choses. Et surtout que beaucoup de nous en tant que parents, nous ne sommes pas allés à l'école quand nous étions dans nos pays. Le fait de ne pas aller à l'école, tu seras toujours sous-informé de ce qui se passe dans des écoles. Il y a toujours les choses d'écartement. Donc, les enfants ont des distances avec d'autres enfants. C'est le fait c'est une chose qui fait que nos enfants sont incapables de s'adapter dans des écoles. Ils sont incapables même d'améliorer. Et l'enseignant lui montre que hey, toi, tu ne peux pas faire ça, tu dois seulement faire ça. J'ai des exemples de mes enfants. J'avais des enfants qui sont venus de l'Afrique. Quand nous sommes arrivés, c'est moi qui connais la capacité intellectuelle de mes enfants. Mais quand l'enfant allait à l'école, souvent il me disait non, moi je vais plus retourner à l'école. Pourquoi? Il me donne des choses des enfants de l'école maternelle, alors que moi aussi je peux faire ce que les autres sont en train de faire à l'école. Quand tu demandes à l'enseignant, il te montrera que non, on a évalué, on a trouvé que l'enfant n'est pas capable. Comment il peut ne pas être capable alors que c'est toi qui es l'enseignant? C'est ça ton travail. Ce sont des problèmes que les enfants rencontrent dans des écoles. Et les choses d'être très distants avec les autres. Donc, ils ne sont pas intégrés. Ils ne sont pas les bienvenus dans des salles de classe. Et surtout qu'on leur donne des enseignants différents. Et c'est le point que je viens de dire, le fait que les enfants ont des matières qui sont différentes des autres enfants. Alors que ton enfant aussi est capable de faire la même matière. Je demanderai, donc c'est les évaluations qui sont nécessaires. Et surtout quand tu poses la question aussi aux enseignants. Les enseignants te disent, OK, on va régler la situation, mais la situation ne sera jamais réglée. Parce que tu trouves que ton enfant, on lui dit toujours que toi, comme Mélanie l'a dit, toi, tu es incapable d'avancer comme les autres. Toi, on va te former, on va te mettre, il y a des abréviations qu'on nous donne là. L'enfant, on va l'occuper comme ceci. Puis, après un certain temps, on va le prendre seulement il va faire des pratiques dehors. Donc, les autres sont en train d'étudier. Ton enfant, on le prend dehors de l'école. Il va faire des pratiques en dehors de l'école pour aller sur le marché du travail. Donc, les enseignants ne nous montrent pas que les enfants peuvent aussi aller loin. Ils ne veulent pas que nos enfants aillent loin, surtout quand ils sont des races différentes. C'est une chose qui est très remarquable dans des élèves, dans des écoles. Mais souvent, quand l'enfant est encore nouveau à l'école, lui, il trouve ça normal. Il croit que c'est ça, la façon d'enseigner ici. Mais quand nous, les parents, nous détectons ça, nous, on doit combattre sur ça. Et on discute toujours dans des réunions des parents, mais on essaie de nous couper. Donc, on donne même 10 minutes. C'est maintenant, madame, tu as seulement 10 minutes. Tu ne peux pas continuer. Tu peux pas, on n'a pas du temps pour toi. On cherchera un autre moment. Des choses. Donc, on essaie de te bloquer pour ne pas foncer de loin. Parce que quand tu as remarqué ça et tu viens le parler à l'école, ils ne sont pas toujours contents. Ça ruine les enfants. Et l'enfant se trouve que, ah, moi, je ne veux plus continuer à étudier. Comme tu l'as déjà dit que toi, tu restes seulement sur le marché du travail. Donc, il se retrouve incapable de faire quelque chose de grand. Donc, les enseignants affaiblissent les enfants. Au lieu de les faire monter, ils les fassent descendre pour qu'ils ne puissent pas continuer. Bon, pour la première question, c'est ce que moi je trouve. Et c'est très frustrant parce que les enfants sont toujours frustrés à l'école. Et les autres enfants ne veulent même pas se rapprocher d'eux. Quand tu es d'une autre race, donc c'est comme si tu es écarté. Sur ce point-là, c'est ce que j'avais à dire. Merci. Peut-être qu'on pourra continuer.
Merci beaucoup, Francine, pour votre témoignage très touchant. Finalement, on va terminer avec le ministre Dominic Carty.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Christine. Merci aussi pour le dialogue Nouveau-Brunswick d'arranger ce dialogue aujourd'hui. Je trouve que, comme toujours, le travail de dialogue est tellement important et on touche sur les questions fondamentales pour pas seulement la province, mais aujourd'hui le système d'éducation, quelque chose qui est clairement proche à mon cœur. So I think when we're talking about how racism can affect the school environment, touch on a couple of issues quickly. And by the way, I've got it because I'm just looking at the time. I've got to I'm helping to organize a rally for Ukraine in Fredericton that's starting at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to have to leave at 4:15 at the absolute latest. So just don't want to be rude if I suddenly have to disappear. Yeah. That for the school system, I think the following things we've got to look at. First, parts of New Brunswick have very little experience with multiculturalism or immigration, and even English and French New Brunswickers often have a lack of familiarity one with the other. And so I think there's a level of unconscious racism that applies when one person arrives who is new and different, that there's a level of surprise and negative reaction sometimes that comes from being in a small place that's been a small place and cut off for a long, long time. That's a small part of it. The next, unfortunately, a huge and growing problem. For the last 20, 30 years, we'd had growing movements against racism, longer than that had started to have a strong impact on institutions across Canada and the West. We're seeing now that those are being eroded and rolled back, and seeing today that that Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who Donald Trump pardoned in the States, who gave a speech today, and he received a huge round of applause at one of the largest conservative gatherings in the US when he said that people think he's the biggest racist in the US. He was actually saying that so then he could say that he wasn't, but everyone cheered when he said he was the biggest racist. And that's something that would have been unacceptable in mainstream politics in Western countries 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and now it's acceptable. So we have this huge wave of social media driven populist racism that is infecting not just our country, but the world. And so that's another huge problem. Then we have a problem with structural racism, institutions built on systems of oppression, and that can express itself in every single way that I'm sure we're going to get into the details. Curriculum development, pictures in textbooks that only reflect white bodies, on and on. The same structures of exclusion and discrimination that have marked the struggle to achieve equality for women, to include people from sexual minorities in the life of our society. So I think that's another problem. Next problem, what I would call, and I don't mean this as a partisan thing, so small L, very important to say that, small L liberal complacency. A belief too often that people who are well-educated and often well-off talking about problems is somehow going to make them disappear without doing the hard work on the ground. And often I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing why this groundswell of angry white racism has reappeared in a lot of Western countries recently, is that too often the people concerned with fixing those problems talk to people who already agreed with them rather than going out and confronting the racism on the ground and doing the work to try and fix it. And I think a last element that we don't talk about often enough in North America is the impact of class as a historical driver that has pushed a lot of North American elites to ignore the fact that often people from racialized communities are just treated as being from a class that they would otherwise ignore, a socioeconomic class. And we've already heard some of those stories here today about how that can affect people. And so talk about ways that we can change schools, and talk about guidance counselors, about how to make, because I've heard from white friends who grew up in poor families who were told exactly the same thing. And so there's this tendency to just take a huge chunk of our population and say, you are destined for welfare, you are destined for vocational school, maybe if you're lucky, and that's it. And that's something where there has to be a conscious analysis of how that's happening and why. And part of the stuff that we're going to talk about in terms of curriculum reforms and other things in the schools can play into that. But in the end, this also has to be, as they say in French, a projet de société. We all have to work together on this to make sure that at the highest levels and at the grassroots, that there's an understanding of these causes and some concrete measures to address them. So I think those are the problems. Now we can talk about the solutions, and I'll stop talking. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Honorable Kadi. So we'll go to the second question, will be what is the impact of unexamined systemic racism on children, youth, and families, and on teachers, administration, school staff? We'll go with the order of Ivan Agustin.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so impacts of unexamined systemic racism on children. To me, it perpetuates systemic racism for years and years and years and years. Children in schools have been taught about racializing minorities and people of color or First Nations people, and there is no challenge. So we have generations of children being taught these things, and when they graduate from high school, eventually university, that generation has racist views, has racist ideas, and that continues to happen. When you look back in the history, that's been on and on and on, an ongoing thing. So the unexamined racism of children in schools continues to happen year after year after year. We have generation after generation after generation of racist views because there is no challenge. The adults as a generation are not challenging what kids are being taught. So to what really is happening there is just an ongoing issue that's not being addressed. Now, I said just a few minutes ago that it's starting to open up. There's some things there that we could start to work towards, some things that we could do in our education system to make some of these things a little bit better. And one of the things we'll all get into a little bit more as we go along is the work that was done by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for First Nation communities in the country. And you might see over just on my left here is the Truth TRC textbooks that are there, and we're going to use those. We should be using those in the future to start addressing a lot of these things, to educate kids as a generation of kids that when they first enter school system, we should be teaching them about diversity. We should be teaching them the correct things, the right things, about First Nation people, about colored people, the proper history. So we have a generation of kids growing up and knowing and being aware of marginalized people, to have a better understanding. And I can't really speak for the communities in the colored communities, but for First Nation people, that's been a real big issue. We haven't been taught our own cultures. First Nations people have a hard time understanding, even though we're moving in that direction now. In the country, that's starting to move as well. So we're starting to see some of these things that are starting to shape up, and trying to address some of these things to correct history. Now, of course, there's an awful lot of work that has to be done, but the more we do work like that, the better a generation will be able to challenge the beliefs that children are being taught. Right now, that is not happening. Right now, adults are just perpetuating the racism, the racist views that kids are coming up with from our school systems.
Thank you, Ivan. Really, that's powerful. And I'll just add to that from what Graham Nickerson and Felix mentioned. I feel like there is no accountability in the school administration or like the counselors that, so experiences parents facing these challenges, but at the same time, they will be invited to go to a barbecue or to go to a birthday, or still face the same challenges. So they're sending their children to the same school. So really, this is a discussion that we all need to have, and continue to have this discussion. Madame Francine.
Pour cette deuxième question, ce que j'ai à dire pour l'impact de ce que les enfants rencontrent dans des écoles, souvent nos enfants sont en train de faire des dépressions. Ça, c'est l'impact de ce racisme fait, même la discrimination. Il y a l'anxiété avec les enfants. Les enfants n'ont pas même de joie, ils n'ont plus de paix. Tu vis avec l'enfant. Et beaucoup de parents, parce que nous, on partage, on se parle en tant que parents dans les communautés. Le parent te montre que mon enfant n'a plus de paix, il n'a plus de joie, il n'a même plus envie de retourner à l'école. Parce que la déconsidération qu'il vit maintenant à l'école, ça ne lui fait même pas plaisir de retourner à l'école. Donc, le fait même d'être surtout d'avoir la dépression fait que nos enfants maintenant, d'autres races, se vaquent dans des choses de peu d'importance. Ils se vaquent dans des choses de drogue, ils font maintenant des choses qui sont bizarres pour essayer de se calmer dans des têtes. Parce que quand l'enseignant qui est là pour t'encourager à devenir quelqu'un d'aimer, te décourage et te montre que tu es un vaurien, tu ne feras rien, donc tu seras comme cela parce que tu es incapable, ça leur fait des dépressions. Et si vous regardiez maintenant, pour ces années, beaucoup des enfants d'autres races qui sont mal vus à l'école, à qui on montre la discrimination, le racisme, ils sont en train de devenir des bandits des cités, les gens qui font des meurtres. Il y a beaucoup des enfants d'autres races parce qu'il te dit que je n'ai rien trouvé à l'école, je n'ai pas eu quelque chose de bon à l'école, j'étais mal vu à l'école, je ne pouvais rien faire d'autre. Donc, c'est ça la vie que je trouve qui est bonne. Donc, quand il est dépressé, donc il ne peut plus rien. Mais, en tout cas, je vois qu'il était le moment maintenant de voir quelle décision serait prise. Il était le moment de voir comment enlever, tirer ces enfants dans la dépression, les tirer dans des anxiétés qu'ils ont maintenant, recréer de nouveau la joie qu'ils ont déjà perdue. Parce que si maintenant on est debout, si on peut maintenant parler, c'est parce que c'est assez. On en a assez. Merci beaucoup.
Je suis d'accord, Francine, merci beaucoup. Maintenant, Graham.
So I would say there's a very wide problematic issue that arises from systematic racism, in that we have communities that are culturally oblivious to their own history. when you look at the panel here, you have a number of Black people who Black or identified as some other self-identification, which is valid. Our community is diverse and we identify in different ways. And that in itself is a problem because we are treated as this monolithic entity in which there's a rich history that straddles every different European power that ever set foot in the territory of New Brunswick and before. So Matthew DaCosta was one of the first people to travel around here, and they spoke a language that was a mixture of First Nations and African and Portuguese and Spanish. And so we have as much right as settlers with the benefits and the responsibility of what that means. But people aren't taught that in school. So my kids never learned any Black history at all, unless I went into the classroom myself and taught it. So that's a problem. And you see it, like, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. And that I'm very discouraged in this province in general with the amount of ignorance that there is in the population. We have a population that doesn't value education and proudly declares that they're uneducated. And so it's hard to have an intellectual conversation when you have, as the Honorable Mr. Carty said, is if people cheer when you say people call me the biggest racist, you're not even getting to the second part of the conversation and so, you know, those Black New Brunswickers who have a birthright here aren't seeing themselves in the curriculum. They aren't seeing themselves as someone who's been handed a birthright, or as problematic as that birthright is. And it's even more so for European settlers of the province who aren't even having that nuanced discussion about what all of this means. And so in the end, I think the teachers don't have the tools to deal with teaching Black history, probably don't even see the difference between Africans and Caribbean Blacks and Indigenous Blacks. And then when you even moving away from there, the entire system is just not built to handle the problems that we're seeing today. And you're hearing testimony, and it hasn't been for some time. I think we can't say that it hasn't gotten better, because as someone who's lived here a long time, I haven't been chased by a mob for about 40 years, and that used to happen, right? So it is getting better, but we're at a point now where we expect more as a community, I would say. Thank you.
Melanie? Thank you, Graham.
Hi. So I don't know if anything has changed yet, even from schools or anything like that, because now I've learned from some of my siblings that are still at school there, and I don't think anything has changed yet, even though we have talked about it. There's no one that actually someone who is really representable to talk about this stuff at their school. So this stuff is still happening, and the only thing that I can say is that sometime we gotta step out and help, like talk to the teachers and to the student. Sorry, one second. But yeah, yes, to my own experience, I've tried so hard to talk, and also sometimes some people goes with aggression You know, when we tell people that we don't want this, the kids are getting, and me too, I did feel depressed, like Mama said, I did feel depressed because the teachers, they told me that, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know, you're helpless, I guess. And I did feel depressed, but then I was like, no, it's not gonna happen. You gotta push yourself. Like this, the teachers are not doing anything for the students, so we gotta push ourselves, keep pushing, and that's how we're gonna try to stop this. You know, we have to come together as a community, as a Black community, and also as a comment on appelle ça même, as diversity. I don't know if that's how you call it. We get together and also talk about it, and maybe it might change something. But since that day, nothing has been changed. I know this one kid that I go to, he's my friend brother. He only wear like something to protect his hair, which they call the durag. Some kids, they wear hats, but then this one time he decided to wear durag because he wanted to protect his hairstyle. The teacher told him that is a violation against the school, that he should remove it or go home, but he didn't accept to remove it. He decided to leave, and it's actually really bad. It's not, nothing has changed most of all, and some students also, some other student that does not know about Black History Month, they'll post some stuff that doesn't, you know, cooperate with us, right? They'll say some bad stuff online, and you know, all the Black community gets offended. And sometimes when we get offended, we should not go with aggression. And let's talk to the parents and talk to the kid, right? So that's the only thing I have to say.
Thank you, Melanie. Well said there. I think we all can work towards this to educate our communities and to educate our neighbors and our friends and the schools, your peers as well. But at the same time, you know, as a Black youth or a student, you have a responsibility to catch up with your education. So it takes a lot of courage and resiliency for what you guys are going through and what you guys are really trying to accomplish. So we'll go to Felix.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What I think is happening, what I think should happen is that
what's the impact, Felix? What's the impact of unexamined systemic racism on children in the school? Well, that was the question.
The impact is we're having children don't want to go to school anymore. We're having kids don't want to do even the work they want to do, you know, because they're given things that they don't want, you know. If I said I want to be a doctor and I'm still in grade 10, grade 11, and all give me, you know, like classes that will not get me to where I want to be, I physically don't want to be in school at that point. I physically just mentally not wanting to be there. Therefore, it just doesn't sit well with us, and it doesn't make us improve in any way. What I think should happen, I think we shouldn't just keep complaining forever. I think there should be some type of way to hold the teachers, the people responsibilities, or have some type of talk with the teachers, with school systems, system, to have them notice what's going on. Maybe I think they don't realize, they don't notice what's going on because they don't have to face that. But we should have some type of system to get them to be aware of what's going on, so these kids can actually enjoy going to school. They can enjoy going to classes, you know, excited. You know, that's what I think should happen.
Thank you, Felix, for sharing that. I'll just say that, you know, as New Brunswick African Association, we've been working with the Department of Education. We met with Mr. Kadi, Dominic Kadi, and his deputy But there is a lot that's been keep rising in the community, as Raymond Times just mentioned, and Felix. I think the work needs to be done. When the graduation photo that came was circulating online from the Fredericton High School. And since then, there is other incident that been occurring in our community, and families are being worried about what's going on at the school. And we've been trying to reach out to the Fredericton High School, Leo Hayes, and to have meetings, or the parents to have meeting with the principal, but we never had anything. It's been like 3 months now. So we've been trying, Felix, we're trying to make them aware of what's happening in the community and what's happening in the school that's not being examined. And that's what is creating more commotion in our community. So we'll head out to Raymond Times.
Yeah, thank you. What is the impact of unexamined systemic racism? Back in 1989 here in Nova Scotia, there was fights and disturbances at one of our big high schools, Cole Harbour in Dartmouth. That got national attention, but we all can relate to those fights and racial issues in the schools. That's how the Black Report got started by the late, great Buddy Day. And from that, it examined everybody, got to sit down and have their say, how they felt and whatever. I'll talk about what came out of that later on when we talk about recommendations that need to move forward. But what I wanted to mention is, what is the impact if we don't examine this and how it affects us? Anger, alcoholism, drugs, crime, homelessness. I remember going through New Mexico and I stopped at a Walmart, and I seen these guys 7 o'clock in the morning drunk. And then one buddy came up to me and asked me for some change. So I asked, why are you in the States so early in the morning? He was First Nations, they were. He said, this is how we get through the day. It numbs us. So, because we face it all the time. We can all relate to that. You want to know how it impacts us? As Minister Carty said about the cheering. You remember the movie, the Jackie Robinson story, where the father was in the stands, tell him, get off the field, you don't belong here. Get off the field. His little son was sitting here, sat beside him. I won't use the exact word that he used, but when the father said, get off the field, you in, the little fellow looked at his father and then looked out. He started repeating what his father said. Okay? This is why it's important for us to engage, and we got to educate each other. We're sitting here, we're talking, and I'm looking at people who look like me. We came on different ways here to get to Canada for the so-called promised land. My ancestors came in the 1700s, and they landed at Shelburne, which Graham can relate to, because they didn't want the First Nations people doing the carpentry work and doing whatever. They just wanted their fish and whatever they could get, and then pushed them aside, promised us a whole lot of things. After we built their homes and got them all started in that, but you can't live here. And when you stand on the lands of Birchtown at the cemetery and you look out and you see the harbor, and if you know the story, you can envision that ship coming in, and then you look to your left through the woods, and you can see the Black people coming through the woods where they settled in Birchtown for their community. Okay, our First Nations brothers and sisters taught us how to live in this cold land. But again, the Black Report, and I'll give you more information on that later. And even I want to talk about the Jordan's principle. But that's what the impact is on us. The other part, the impact of unexamined racism, systemic racism is we need the leaders. And again, I'll say this to Mr. Carty, Mr. Augustine, those of us, because we're talking about the education system, starts from the top. Okay. You can put out fine words, you can do whatever you want, but everything has got to be action oriented with measured results. Are we going to change this overnight? No. Back in 2013, I was an invited guest to the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement in Birmingham, Alabama. I sat there with the late John Lewis, okay, Andrew Young, Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter. I sat right beside the lone survivor of the bombing of the 4 young Black girls, the lone survivor. She's a couple of years younger than me. We talked about it. Going to school, she started, you know, telling me about what it was like in that. And I was saying, nothing's really changed in 50 years. So when I got up, and our Canadian ambassador, Mr. Carty, you mentioned about this guy speaking and whatever. Our Canadian ambassador stood there at the 16th Street Baptist Church platform and said, oh, we don't have no racial issues in Canada. And I got up and I challenged him right there on the platform. Okay. I'm a fighter. I won't let that stuff slide. Not here, but in the house, which is only a couple of blocks over, I had 2 carloads come up to my house calling me the N-word because I supported the rights of the gay community here. And then it was only a little while after that, I had 15 of them trying to break my door down, wanting to fight with me because I was standing up for the community. Okay. Now, and I'm getting back to the structure part. I sent it out to the counselor, the mayor and the counselor. And I said, this is what took place. But the next day we were having our council meeting. I was a few minutes late as always. I came around the corner and they were in the private room where councilors in that set. And I stood by the door and I heard them saying, oh, that Raymond Tynes, he's just making this stuff up so he can get attention in the papers again. I had to tell him right there on camera, do I got to bring my wife here? Why do I need to have and I love my wife, don't get me wrong, but why do I need to have a white person to come and validate what I said that's happened to me? Okay. And I'll finish this part with this. What's the impact? Well, we get lots of sympathy. We'll get it from everybody, lots of sympathy. But we don't want sympathy, okay? We want empathy, because empathy involves putting yourself in our shoes and understanding why we have these particular feelings. Because sympathy does nothing for us. Makes you feel good and then you walk away. Well, we got to live with the pain. And our young ones, if we don't do something today, 50 years from now, our young ones are going to be having the same discussion. Will there be improvements? I hope so. But as we get into the next part of whatever, I'm going to give out some thoughts of how to move forward and what we need to do in New Brunswick and continue like even here in Nova Scotia. But the very first thing that you're doing here is we're engaging and we're educating. We're talking about our own experiences. Hopefully there are going to be others, but we can't stop here. Okay, we just can't stop here. We've got to empower people to be able to step up. And I don't care if it's Black, white, First Nations, or whomever, because that's how we educate. If somebody says something ignorant to me, okay, I used to get mad and I had my fists all ready. But now I want to have that dialogue, that education. Am I going to change the world? Or is something going to fall down? We're all going to change? No. First, I change myself, and who's ever within reach of me wants to have that discussion. If I change one person, let me finish with this. I was a Texan guy right here in Nova Scotia. He was as racist as you could be sitting at the truck stop. He said, oh, my CB broke. And I know what it's like to be on the road and can't communicate. I went out to my truck and bought him my spare CB. Say, here. He looked at me and said, what are you doing? You don't know me. You don't even know if you'll get it back. I said, it doesn't matter. I know what it's like. Take it. If you don't give it back, then use it in good health. 6 months later, there was a brown envelope sitting at that truck stop, and or a brown paper bag and a note in it. Thank you very much, sir. I don't know if I helped change one person's mind or not, but that's how we do it, one person at a time. Anyway, I'll stop there, and because I really want to delve into how we move forward, and that's when I will really have my say.
Thank you, Raymond Times. We really appreciate that. We'll go to Minister Kadi, please.
Thanks so much. So a lot of the things we've already heard, I think, sum up the big problems that we're, first off, I think Ivan had started it off on exactly the right point, that if we don't deal with this problem in schools, the racism continues. And it is incredibly depressing that we're seeing, again, an upsurge in racism after efforts as incomplete and imperfect as they have been for a long time to try and push back against racism, to see now that it has a pretty much an unfiltered channel into the minds of every single person in the country, forget about students, through social media. And so I think that we're going to have to talk about critical thinking, but that gets into the stuff, how we fix the problems. But in terms of the consequences of racism, first, it carries on. Next, as was described really eloquently, it holds individuals back. And that's, of course, that's the whole point of racism, right? Is that you want racist stereotypes to become real. Then you can justify your own racism. So you push people so they can't get jobs. You push people so they've got no alternative but to seek solace through drugs or alcohol. And then you can sit back and go, oh, look at those guys. They don't have any work. They're not working and they're on drugs. And that just feeds the cycle. So it's the point of racism to attack and diminish and undermine people so that they live up to the stereotypes that racists want to give of them. And that's why you see every country in the world where you have a community engaged in acts of racism against any other community, those are the tools that they use. They will try and impose and limit and restrict and oppress, and then they'll claim that those limitations are now somehow the fault of the people who are being persecuted. So the big thing there, of course, in the individuals too, as individuals, is that you are vastly more likely to end up suffering from mental health problems, from physical health problems as well. There was a big study in the States done on Black kids versus white kids, and instances of heart disease and others based on their experience of racism as they grew up. So there's solid medical evidence around the destructive impact this has, because if you grow up living with people who tell you that you're a bad person, that you can't do things, how on earth are you going to take this as anything other than an attack on you and draw back within yourself? And when you draw into yourself, you look for comfort in ways that are often self-destructive. And especially if you're limited in the opportunities that you're then given by your society, then again, it just helps to continue to reinforce that problem. And I think it was Graham as well, was talking about the problems we have with people not being aware of their own history. And this is where I'm going to say something I think on the one hand everyone's going to agree with. On the other hand, I'll be interested in comments. We don't do enough work teaching civics and critical thinking. And I think we'll talk about critical thinking in a little bit. But one of the problems and the consequences with that is that we have grown up with, in New Brunswick specifically, a province where we have very little understanding of our own history. And that has meant that for white New Brunswickers of European descent, often our only form of self-identification is negative. It's in opposition to others, rather than recognizing the good and bad of our history, the bad things that were absolutely done by my ancestors, although I'm a first-generation immigrant myself, but the bad that was done, but also the positive things. The fact that European English society was the first society to abolish slavery in history. And say, this is part of our cultural heritage, not racism, not the guys wandering around in hoods and importing racist stereotypes from the US, but there are threads of anti-racism that go back in European culture for hundreds of years. And those are the things we should celebrate and amplify. And so that we then give kids of European backgrounds something to be proud of for themselves and their histories and traditions. So I think it's something where we've got to look at this in a really holistic way. And how do we build a generation of kids who are proud of where they came from, proud of the good that is in all of our cultures, recognizing and being aware of and ready to condemn the bad, and then recognizing that right now we're doing something amazing and new that's hardly ever happened in human history, of building a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious polity. in this province and in this country. And this is something hardly anyone has ever tried before. And it's incredible. And you know how we know it's working? Because we're some of the richest and freest and best places to live, despite the oppression that's ongoing, despite the systemic racism that's still there. But the fact that we're aware that systemic racism exists, no matter how late it is and how frustrating that must be for everyone in this meeting who's having to deal with this every single day. But at least we are talking about it being a problem. And again, getting ready to head off for this rally against the invasion of Ukraine, we have major world superpowers who deny the existence of Black people, gay people, of the contributions of anyone other than their own narrow ethnic background. And those folks are busy fighting wars now against the people who have a broader view of the world. So it's I think this conversation is really important for that. But I think those are what I would see as the big impacts right now on not dealing with this problem. And now we're going to get into the solution. So again, I'll be quiet. And by the way, for this call, please just call me Dominic. Honorable is fine for the House, but we're sitting here talking about how we can make our province better, and we're all either New Brunswickers or Canadians.
Thank you, Dominic. Merci. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. Like, it kind of bring us back to the theme of this month, Ubuntu. I am, because we are. It's important that we come together and that we have those conversations. It's important. We'll move on to the third question. What change needs to take place in order to make meaningful steps in dismantling systemic racism in schools in New Brunswick? We'll start with Raymond first, please.
Yes, thank you. Just to jump on something that Mr. Cardy said, the British abolished slavery and whatever. Yes, slavery, the chains were taken off, but we went from overt racism to invert racism.
Absolutely.
Okay, the mind. Now, how do we change things? Here's a few ideas. I was looking through everything, and it was brought up to me the other day. Take Jordan's principle. And I think everybody here, most of you should know about Jordan's principle, the effects they had on First Nations kids. But you just close your eyes and we can apply that and the recommendations that came out of that to any group, any community, if we are sincere, okay? I mentioned the Black report based on the, they use nice words, but it actually was like riots at Cole Harbour School back in '89. The details of it, I'm not going to read here, but if you want to move forward and we want to do it in a meaningful way, I looked at the makeup of the New Brunswick education system. It's a little bit different than ours here in Nova Scotia. Okay. The way I read it, it seems like the superintendents have a lot of power. A lot of power. Well, Mr. Cardy, you need to take some of that. Take some of that power away. But if you're going to allow them to have it, then what we suggest here, you need to enforce upon them, because change has to happen. Now, to the Black report and how some things were made to start changing things around. First thing we got to do is we got to have cultural education and examine self-esteem. We need the school system, the communities, and the parents all got to work together. And again, it starts at the top. We have an underrepresentation of Black teachers and administrators. Because again, I go back to sympathy and empathy. They can have sympathy, but they can't really understand. And when they're sitting around in the lunchroom having discussions about the kids and whatever, there's nobody there that looks like us, or there's not enough there that looks like us to be able to have that engaged, educated discussion to empower people to move forward. Then there is need for more multicultural anti-racism policies, real policies with teeth. I looked at some of the policies there in this education system, And I saw nothing there other than a few nice words that talked in general. So we need to have a real discussion about that. Learning and teaching materials. We need more, okay? And as been said, instead of pushing everybody to general courses, everybody who looks like us and First Nations kids, and yes, I'll even say, I hate to use the word poor, but working class white kids who come from working class families need access to higher education and financial support. We need that. And then how do we deal with the parents? Because they send the kids to school to be taught. And I read an article there the other day, or was on Twitter arguing with somebody. They said, you know, we just want our kids to be taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're going to teach them the rest. And we're dealing with a lot now. People have said, oh no, we don't want them telling their story because it's going to make our kids feel bad. We didn't do that. That was the generation before us. But as long as we allow the colonial system to tell our story, excuse the expression, all we're going to get is the whitewashed version. And we need mobilization and training parents. And I'll say this especially for the Black community and First Nations community, we really need the advocacies for our kids. And we need real teacher education and professional development. And how's that going to happen? You need more of us sitting in the room. For example, here a couple of years ago, when the pandemic first started, they were talking about diversity, and they were going to have training sessions. No disrespect, but they had white people leading the session to talk about us again. You know, again, we got to get past that. Okay. We need teacher education and professional development. Now we get down to school development or school discipline. Let's take the young hockey player who was using the N-word and whatever, got 5-game suspension. The other kid, or the white kid that stood up for the kid, he got a 5-game suspension because he stood up for a person of color. And this is the PEI situation. When I was dealing with them, I said, you know, it's not enough for a 5-game suspension, because if we just suspend kids, guess what? They're going to find a group that's negative like them, and they're just all going to be negative. What we need to do is, and what we've been attempting here, is to bring the kid, I say kid, well, everybody's kid to me, I'm 71 years old, so it don't matter to me. Bring the kid and the parents in, have that straight discussion, straight up facts. Instead of giving a 5-day suspension or whatever, have them kids do community work, 5 days community work within the communities of color. You'd be surprised how much change that'll help. And then on top of that, because of our experiences, we have low teacher expectations. And right away, as soon as we walk through the door, we can feel that insensitivity because it's been inherited, okay? More importantly, again, I go back to community and parent involvement. You've got to involve us. Real change isn't going to happen if we're not sitting at the table, okay? And I'll be blunt in saying this, and I say this at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation all the time. Stop going out there and trying to find people with PhDs and master's degrees. Go find the people who have lived the experience in the communities, who care and want change. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go and get a master's degree or a PhD or whatever, But as my father used to say, just because you got that and you got no life skill experiences, you just got an educated fool running around. I tell you, I'm blunt, so you'll just have to bear with me. I call it the way I see it. I'm almost done. And we need support for youth organizations and the programs to help them with their education and community skills, okay? There's so much more, but I'm going to leave it at that. But again, I need you to, if you can go sit down, have a serious look at the Jordan's principle and dig out that black report from Nova Scotia. I'm sure Terry or somebody can find that link. It's going to have the recommendations and everything that's in there. Now, if nothing else, and again, I go to the makeup of the education department within New Brunswick. Here, we have within our education department, we have an African division, okay, who's set beside. We have First Nations. I see there's a First Nations department within the Department of Education, but we have an African division. Does it work exactly the way I'd like to see it? Is things falling out of the sky, the changes is going to happen overnight? No. But we got to start someplace. And yes, Mr. Cardy, I will say this. The reason why I had mentioned earlier about superintendents having a lot of power, I'm not saying you take that power away from them, but you and your staff need to listen more and be more engaged in the communities too. Because if, for example, if I was to write you and say, this is the situation I'm feeling, and I did that with the incident just happened, the email I got back was, well, we don't usually send this to the minister, we send it to the superintendent. So a lot of stuff you never hear. But that superintendent holds all the power. Luckily here in Nova Scotia, the African Services Department within the Department of Education holds them accountable. And also here we have student support workers. We have every school, or every, not the school, but the school board has a person designated from the African Nova Scotia community and First Nations community, sitting at every school board. We need to, again, engage, educate, and empower. And unfortunately, Mr. Cardy, when you're like me, when I was sitting at the top of Troll Town Council, I didn't make it to the mayor's position. I lost that election. But at the times I served the deputy mayor, and even as councillor, I took the heat because of what the workers did, the operations side of things did. I was the one who took the heat. When things were going good, I gave them the credit. But then I demanded more of them. And I just didn't say, I said, here's our vision, here's our strategy, and here's the results I expect. Am I always going to be happy? No, but it's a work in progress. And I will throw this out to you too. Start using the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, who is connected right across Canada and can get you any data, share you with partners all over, so we don't have to invent the wheel or reinvent the wheel. And I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry, Marie, I just, you know me, I have to have my say.
That's fine. Thank you, Raymond. Just because Dominique has to leave by 4, I'll just change the order and go to Dominique. And again, just a friendly reminder to our panelists that we have some questions in the Q&A. You can answer live or type in your answer. Dominique?
Hey, thanks very much for that. And sorry for jumping the queue. So I think a lot of the points that have already been raised, totally agree with. Staffing issues and others. One of the things that hasn't been touched on yet, which I think is important, is how we can use technology in the smaller communities in New Brunswick, which I mentioned in my first question, answer to the first question, where you don't necessarily have, in some cases, anyone from any other communities other than the dominant French or English community and all of European descent. That's one of the issues that New Brunswick has long faced, that we were one of the last places in the world to become not majority rural just a few years ago. So trying to use technology, which we've been forced into through COVID with all sorts of different educational tools and online learning, which is certainly not great, but there are things that we can pull from that, I think, to try and reinforce some of the anti-racism work that Mr. Tynes was laying out really clearly there, that it's got to be about PD. It's got to be about making sure people have got those resources. I know from having a good relationship with the heads of the two provincial teachers unions, we've got one English, one French, that there's a lot of support there from inside that profession, and certainly no unwillingness in the university at the university level. So I think there's that's absolutely something that has to happen. I'm glad that the issue around governance was raised, because that is absolutely an issue that New Brunswick has traditionally taken around 7 years to go from a policy idea being suggested to an actual curriculum change. And part of that's because we have this very strange system where the districts are accountable to elected district education councils, who are usually only get the votes of a tiny number of people. They're elected at the same time as the municipal elections take place. It's really minimal turnout. And those are the folks who hire and fire the district superintendents. I have to sign off the letter approving that they've followed the rules, but it's a very decentralized. And I'd like to see more democratic authority at the local level so we can have more community engagement, and then some more accountability at that provincial level, because right now it's just not something I even have legal authority over, as much as I can talk about trying to set the standard and the tone for the system. So another thing I think that we can really work on is, if you don't mind, because I'm going to miss my fourth question, but the one thing that I think we have to work to deal with is inside the school system, first, improvements to the curriculum around both civics and history, and to make sure that the voices of the communities that are being discussed are actually included in that policy process. And so those meetings have begun, and that process is happening. It has to happen as quickly as possible, because every year that we wait right now is another year when, in some cases, just straight up unfiltered hate and misinformation is entering our students' brains through social media without the tools to be able to push back against it. So I think those are things that, if we're going to talk about something that can unite everyone from every background, seeing that critical thinking structures, basically the scientific method applied to social problems, it works. And that's how we've managed to help to start fixing some of the issues that have plagued our society along with other societies around the world for a long time. So then the last thing I'd say is that we have to work as well around the staffing issues, because New Brunswick still is too often in government prone to not, I think, the sort of organized corruption in hiring that used to be common around the world, but it's still a case where if you see 3 names on a list of finalists and one of them you happen to know, you're more likely to hire that person. And some checks there to make sure, because again, we're talking about how to deal with systemic racism, you deal with a system by improving or changing the system. And in this case, that means creating systems that themselves can be used to counter the effects of structures of racism that have been there for a long time. So if I don't get the chance to speak up again, thank you very much. And I'll come back and watch any of the part that I miss after things are done. And also, for anyone who's interested in reaching out directly, who have thoughts on improving the education system here, I'll put a note in the chat as well. You can drop me an email to dominic.cardy@gmb.ca. And my cell number is 238-5550. And I'm absolutely going to take up that suggestion about contacting the Canadian Race Relations Foundation if folks in my department haven't done that already. Thanks for that. And any other suggestions, they're always welcome. Thanks for being part of the event today. Letting me be part of the event. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you,
Minister Cardy.
And we'll move back to Graham. You're on mute.
There. Okay. Yeah, I was muted on my laptop and someone was muting me on and off through there. Anyway, it's always fun, technology. Yeah, I would echo. I think the requirement, as a historian, to me, it's all about civics. We've found ourselves the recipients of a very whitewashed curriculum. that has basically created divisions within communities that didn't exist, but made sense in terms of trying to construct a national identity. And it's a reflection of the times that these sort of things were done. There should be very little difference between how one recognizes, say, someone from Scotland or Ireland who comes to New Brunswick, or of Irish heritage or Scottish heritage or Welsh heritage, with someone who comes from the Caribbean. On a historical basis, the importation of African slaves into the West Indies regiments, for instance, allowed European soldiers to fight Napoleon and the Americans. Had that not happened, then all of those Europeans would have had to have been stationed in the Caribbean. And so we owe the rest of the world enough to recognize their tie to our culture and our independence, our very independence. And so people don't need to walk around feeling grateful every second of every day, but when one is finds themselves in a quiet space and reflecting on who they are and how they got there, you have to pay the ancestors some kind of respect. And what I found with I didn't know very many people, Black people, who weren't relatives of mine until recently. I haven't been on a panel where I see this many Black faces until probably the last couple of years, when people started paying attention. But I noticed that one thing that seems to be common is that we honor our elders and we listen to our elders when they tell us stuff. The other thing that I hear when I hear Raymond is I hear a language that I learned, how I learned to speak. And I was taught that that's bad English, but it's not. It's how Africans sound after a couple hundred years when they've managed to maintain some of their culture. And so now when I speak at home, I speak the language that I learned growing up, and I don't feel guilty about it, right? And that's the Black experience, is everything you know and you grow up with. When you're in a white environment, it's wrong. It's the wrong way to do things. It's wrong to be emotional. It's wrong to be, if you don't dance in public, if you tell jokes in class, you get in trouble. And that's common in our culture, is we use humor. So that kind of civics and awareness, it needs to be distilled into the system, right? But the Black people around here in New Brunswick aren't like that. Yeah, we are. We're just like it when you're not around, because who wants to be invested or have themselves examined all the time by outsiders? We put on our mask and we go out into the world and we behave the way that we have to behave. In terms of Prince Edward Island, and as a historian, I just there are things that I know, and every now and then you got to drop a bomb into a conversation for people to go, oh, Prince Edward Island is the only place in Canada that had legalized slavery. In New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, slavery was covered under property law. Slavery was not legal, but it wasn't illegal. It was covered under property law. And so you could have slavery. That's why a lot of the slave trials in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick happened the way they did. It was all covered under possession, and the courts honored possession of bonded people. That's just a legal fact, right? It's not my opinion. It's not my feelings. That's just a fact. You can crack open books and you'll find it. In Prince Edward Island, the culture was exactly the same as in the Caribbean, in which there are brutal stories. I recommend, there's a book called Black Islanders. The authors, I can't remember the first name, Hornsby, I believe, or Hornby. I have it upstairs, but I can't get it now. And you will read about a brutal form of slavery that occurred in Prince Edward Island, and it was legal, and they worked towards making it that way. So that civic awareness needs to be part. You cannot sit there and have a discussion about Prince Edward Island and racism and all that stuff and not go back to the very first principles and say, okay, let's investigate this in some manner and try and make sense of it. The same as we would and should in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. and it requires people to not get overly defensive from the get-go. It should be the one thing that that academics have that tempers their lived experience is that when you sit at the table, you can communicate in a language, and if you're trained right, you can tap into your emotions, but at the end of the day, we need to use logic and sources and evidence and map out the way forward. And I think for those of us who are of color, who have been professionally trained in the academic world and have learned the language and the tools, it allows us to sit at the table a little more, maybe a few more tables than we would otherwise. Thanks.
Thank you, Graham. Thanks. Next, we'll go with Yvan Augustin. Here we
Yes,
go.
thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that question, meaningful steps in dismantling racism. For me, you know, and being a First Nation and First Nation education, which is from the federal government, just in context, what First Nation education is, we're not part of the provincial education system. We work closely with the provincial education system, but we're under the Indian Act. We're work under the federal government, and the federal government has given an F in First Nation education because they're not in the business of education. So they just kind of like the flow of funding to First Nations, whether adequate or not. There's a lot of debate about those things. But the key word there for me is meaningful, taking meaningful steps to dismantle racism. I think a lot of work has been done in trying to dismantle racism. A lot of work has been done to do something about it, but they've never really taken hold. They've never really worked. They might work for a while, bring out an awareness, but it doesn't stick. So in my belief, and in the last few years, the work that we've done in partnership with the Department of Education and the federal government and some of the education organizations here in New Brunswick is treaty education, to educate all our kids in our band operated school and the provincial schools as well in treaty education, to develop curriculums that we implement mandatorily with children at when they enter school. And it's something that has to be there, that has to be taught to the kids, grade after grade after grade after grade. And I think in the long run, this is a long-term goal. By teaching every child in every classroom in New Brunswick across the country, everyone about First Nation education, First Nation issues, contributions by First Nations people, as well as Black history, to educate kids so that kids grow up with an awareness of where First Nations come from. And I believe teaching kids this starting now, 20 years from now, we will have a generation of kids that have a high awareness of First Nation treaties, First Nation issues, First Nation treaty rights, land rights, on and on and on. That's not there now. And if we started a process like this, our education system started a process like this 25, 30 years ago, New Brunswick would not have seen the fracking battles that we had here in neighboring Rexton with First Nation people. We would not have the lobster wars we had in Sconobadish Burn Church. We would not have had the salmon wars that happened up here in the Miramichi, or forestry, for example, forestry issues in New Brunswick, because there was never an awareness of the non-First Nation population about where First Nations stand in terms of land ownership, communal ownership, treaty rights, what's in treaties, And it's led to a lot of division that way because of that lack of awareness. So for me, the long-term goal of trying to dismantle systemic racism is to change the system where kids are being educated. Our the books I referred to here on TRC, Truth and Reconciliation, the author Murray Sinclair, former Senator Murray Sinclair, said that it is education that has brought us to this point on systemic racism, bigotry, whatever you want to call it, across the country. And it will be education that gets us out of here. But it has to be a total commitment on governments that we go to work with the First Nation communities, that they got to be at the table, work with treaty education, what we have grade 3 done, grade 4 and grade 5 done. We're working on a grade 6 in conjunction with the Department of Education, with other partners, federal government. However, we just don't see that being high accountable in the schools. We could get a treaty education for a school in downtown in Cambridge Narrows, and the teacher will put it aside on the shelf to collect dust. There's no accountability. And that's what I would like to see for generations from now on, is for the government to hold teachers accountable, to educate kids when they come into school at 4 years old, at 5 years old, to educate kids and bring out the positive aspects of First Nation issues, community contributions to society. And I believe the long-term goal to dismantling racism, systemic racism, is to change the system where our kids are educated. And we got to approach it with children. They're the ones that, as a generation coming up, they're the ones that are going to have these awarenesses. They're going to be educated properly, with proper history, accurate history, whether it be First Nation or Black history. That I believe in my heart that that's the ideal, the sincerest way to do it, is to educate kids properly and root out and educate out of the system, the systemic racism that we are talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. We'll move now to Melanie.
Yes. What's the question?
So the question is, what change needs to take place in order to make meaningful steps in dismantling systemic racism in New Brunswick?
To me, we tried a lot actually, but the only thing that we have to do is just sit down and talk, because we have been protesting. There's been so much going on, but I think that the better things to do is to sit down, get together as a community, and we talk about it and try to tell the teachers, the parents actually also, to educate the kids, and also the school system. When they're talking about Black history, or when they're talking about like those type of stuff, they have to really be educated before they come out like that. So that's the only thing that I can say right now, because we have been talking about that a lot, but we should not stop talking about that. Even it takes years, we always have to do that. And some people, like I said, some people go with aggressive. They have to, because when they can't take too much of that, they feel, I don't know how to say, they feel sad, or they feel really bad emotion in them because of what is happening. So the only thing we can do is just to calm down and talk about it. And yeah, hopefully one day it's gonna be good.
Thank you, Mélanie. Francine, selon toi, quels changements doivent être apportés afin de prendre des mesures significatives pour démanteler le racisme systémique dans les écoles au Nouveau-Brunswick?
Pour moi, le changement que je peux demander, et ce que je trouve que ça doit être apporté, c'est d'abord penser à comment impliquer d'autres enseignants des autres races dans l'éducation et le changement de la façon dont on enseigne, impliquer même les histoires d'autres races dans l'enseignement et surtout encourager les élèves qui se trouvent que nous sommes discriminés, nous ne sommes pas bien vus, les encourager même quand ils ne sont pas même capables de se défendre dans la salle de classe ou bien de parvenir à comprendre ce qu'ils font, que l'enseignant soit là, qu'il soit là pour motiver et encourager l'enfant, lui montrant que demain tu pourras faire mieux qu'aujourd'hui et demain tu seras quelqu'un de capable de faire quelque chose de grand. Et le changement de leur méthode là, de supporter certains enfants et ne pas soutenir d'autres. Parce qu'il y a des enfants qui ne sont pas, beaucoup de nos enfants ne sont pas soutenus à l'école. Et surtout dans des camps de menaces comme cela, les enseignants doivent changer. Ils doivent soutenir des deux côtés. Montrer aux enfants que vous êtes tous des élèves. Montrer aux enfants que vous avez tous le même droit. Parce que nous avons des exemples. Par exemple, moi, la semaine passée, mon enfant avait vécu une situation qui était très, très, très mauvaise et ça a même fait qu'elle a refusé de retourner à l'école. C'est jusqu'à ce que j'ai appelé l'école. Ils ont essayé de me montrer que non, les enfants se sont chamaillés, mais on a essayé de les faire comprendre que c'est normal. Mais je les avais donné l'explication de l'enfant. Ils l'ont pris de côté dans le privé. L'enseignant est parti parler à l'enfant dans le privé. Ce qui n'a pas plu à l'enfant, lui montrer, touchant même sa religion. Tout ça, ça a beaucoup blessé l'enfant. Moi-même, ça m'a blessé en tant que parent. J'ai appelé l'école voulant rencontrer la direction. Ils ont refusé. Ils ont dit non, si c'est question de cela, on doit parler au téléphone. On n'est pas permis de rencontrer les gens à l'école pour le moment. J'ai essayé de comprendre, mais j'ai essayé de leur dire qu'il est mineur. Vous devriez me contacter en tant que parent. On devrait discuter la situation ensemble. Le soutien, maintenant, vous l'avez donné à l'autre enfant et vous avez fait tomber mon enfant. Et alors que c'est l'autre que vous avez supporté qui était en faute. Parce que dire à quelqu'un que tu as fait des choses sur les réseaux sociaux et montrer qu'il était en train de se moquer de certains genres de gens, alors que c'est faux. Et puis, quand l'enfant a dit seulement à l'autre que si tu oses encore, je vais te taper. Directement, vous l'aviez convoqué dans la direction. C'est pas ça, parce que ça l'a frustré. Jusqu'à ce que même dans la salle de classe, l'enseignant, quand il posait la question, toute la classe ne répondait pas. Il pointait seulement mon enfant. C'est toi qui dois répondre. Et quand l'enfant répondait, il disait que tu ne devrais pas répondre de là. Donc, il tournait sur l'enfant. Donc, tu vois ce que ça fait. Que les enseignants essaient de voir la manière de parler, de s'exprimer devant les enfants, envers les enfants. Parce que quand tu essaies de tourner sur l'enfant, tu le traumatises. Il se trouve qu'il est mal vu devant les autres enfants parce qu'il se moque. Quand il passe, regarde comment il ressemble, regarde comment il marche, regarde comment il est. L'enseignant est là pour essayer de maîtriser la situation. Et il doit défendre des deux côtés, montrer aux enfants que tous vous êtes des élèves et voir quelle solution prendre. En tout cas, que les écoles essaient de marcher sur ces choses et regarder comment protéger, surtout les races qui sont mal vues, les races qui sont discriminées. Et la méthodologie aussi, la méthode d'enseigner, le fait toujours d'encourager les enfants, c'est ça ce que je trouve que ça devrait être changé dans des écoles.
Merci, Francine. Puis on est d'accord qu'il y a beaucoup à être fait au niveau de l'éducation. On va finir avec Félix. Félix?
Yes. What I think needs to change, it's a lot of things need to change, but most importantly, like everybody has been saying, is the system. We need to change the system. That's one. Because I do remember when I was in high school and the teacher told me that I'm probably going to become, it was the counselor, sorry, that I'm going to become nothing but a roofer. And I told him, you can't say that. You can't tell me I'm going to become a roofer. That's not what I want to do. And he said, well, that's what it is. I said, no, that's not how it happens. And I told my parents, and when I told my parents, they tried contacting them through MCUF, Multicultural Association of Fredericton. And honestly, nothing came out of it. They can say whatever they want because they don't face any consequences. So they're just going to tell you whatever they want, do whatever they want, no consequences. And I think what needs to change is there's got to be some type of system to hold people accountable. So the counselors, the teachers, they're going to be held accountable to be able to know that I can't say certain things, I can't do certain things. There's going to be some consequences coming after me saying certain things, you know, to students, to teachers. We've been very treated unfairly, but no one wants to talk about it. I do remember one time, I remember one time I was in a gym class, and this kid was calling me the N-word and all this stuff multiple times. I told the teacher multiple times that this was happening, and the teacher just told me, just wait after class, I'm going to talk to them about it. And he didn't. Second day. So when I got very angry and frustrated, that's been nearly 3 days, and the teacher just told me, go sit down, we'll talk about it. So I really came out, I punched the kid, not that I meant to, but I was very, very angry that it's been happening over and over again, and the teacher's just doing nothing about it. And I know I told my parents, they're gonna go to MCUF, Multicultural Association of Fredericton, and Multicultural gonna try to talk to them, but there's nothing's gonna happen. So I got very angry and I punched him in the stomach. So the police came, put me in handcuffs, and I tried to explain, and they would just tell me, you don't fight, it doesn't matter what happened. I'm like, I tried for so long, for 3 days. I tried not to fight for 3 days. I tried to take it a good way, but nothing is happening. So what do you suggest I do? They just said, oh, go to the police and tell you. And I'm not gonna go to the police. They're gonna tell me, wait, it's gonna be a month, 2 months, same thing happening over and over again because the system isn't good. So eventually they let me go, but I could see that they were really, really hoping that they can take me into custody and take me to jail, because it just, the whole thing, it was so messed up. I couldn't believe what was happening. So I just think there's got to be some type of system, educate the teachers too, because they don't know or they don't care. Just educate the teachers, the counselors, the whole thing just needs to change. And that's just what I think. I think that's what should change. The system first. We gotta attack the system before we do anything else. The system has to change. There has to be some solutions. There has to be some type of consequences they face when something like this happens. We gotta have an organization to be in schools, to go in schools, to make sure that they are being held accountable when they do wrong. That's what I think should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. You know, that's exactly what a lot of kids or the youth or the children that are going to school from the African community, the newcomers community, this is the challenge they're facing with their parents. What Francine has been mentioning here, trying to get a hold of to speak with the school. Felix, you know, keep telling the teachers about this situation, but nothing's changed until you retaliate. And then you're being held accountable or you did something wrong. But so we need to be able to tackle this head on. We need to tackle this before problems arise in our community or our youth ended up getting criminal record just because somebody called them an N-word and they're reacting. So we need to be able to change the way our the teachers, educators, the counselor, the school system itself, because that's the second most place the children are spending their time with beside their home is the school. And if the school is discriminating them and is making them more having a mental health problem, all that stuff is going to be really challenging for the families. And especially when newcomers family or the African families, they're single when they're coming here. Francine is a single mother with 4 children, you know, and she has to be able to deal with this. You know, Felix coming here as a young African youth, he never experienced racism in his country, but now he's dealing with racism once he reaches here in Canada, where they thought it's going to be a safe haven for them. So we'll dive into our 4th question, and we have some question and answers remaining for the remaining time. So if there is a decision maker, if the decision makers can act on one thing today to address systemic racism in school, in New Brunswick school, what should that be? I'll repeat the question again. If the decision makers can act on one thing today to address systemic racism in New Brunswick school, what should that be? We'll go with the order of Mr. Kadi is already left. We'll go with Felix.
I think what the action that should happen as soon as possible is to put people with color in the system to be able to identify and call out when things happen. And not just that, I think there should be some type of group organization that are there to say things when things happen, to come to. If I had, let's say, from my experience, if I had someone to go to and tell them now, knowing that they're going to hold them accountable, I would not have punched that kid. The first time happened, maybe I should have to tell the teacher. The second time, I would have went to that group that I know that they're going to have my back. But because there is nothing, I got very angry and I acted the way I acted. I didn't want to act that way. But after 3 days of things happening constantly, it looks like the teacher is disrespecting me now. It looks like maybe the teacher will call me the same thing because he just said, sit down. I will talk to him, but nothing changes. I think there should be some type of system or group that are there to back us up when things like that happen. They're able to call out the teachers and the students. They say if they had people that were there knowing that whatever happens, they're going to be held accountable, even though that wouldn't end, but it would change so many things for the students to go to school feeling that I'm not going to be harassed today because of my skin color. I'm not going to be called the N-word because I don't matter and no one is here to speak for me. I think that should change something. I think there should be a group of people that are there to call out the teachers and call out the system when something goes wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. We'll go with Melanie. Please.
Yes.
If the decision makers can act on one thing today to address systemic racism in New Brunswick school, what should that be?
Yeah, like Felix said, like there's no one there to actually see what is happening with the kids. So I think that, like, I totally agree with what Felix said, and actually is actually really good. They did had this same organization at École Saint-Anne, but they were doing nothing about it, right? We'll go to them, we'll talk about it, but they still didn't do anything. So I feel like they have to find someone that actually really want to help. So that is actually there to listen to the kids and also talk to the teachers, and also the parents also the kids have to always go to the parents and tell. Some parents, they don't know English, right? So parents, when they come here, they don't know English, they don't know French. So that's why they need, even the parents that knows how to speak English, also, if they want to put themselves in that, they can also, we need some type of organization, like Felix said. And also, I think that the kids and the teachers, before saying something, they gotta really know what they're about to say, or what is coming out of in your head. If also ask the question, what they said does it make sense? Like, is it good what you just said, right? Because the teacher, they'll always say that, you're not good, you're whatever, you're not good enough. But do you respect what you just said? Like, you're old enough, you have to bring the youngest up, not down. You have to talk to them also as a teacher, because what teachers are for, to educate the kids. It's not to put them down, it's to educate them, and also give them the opportunity to become what they want to be tomorrow. So yeah, I totally agree to what Felix said, and they should have some type of organization, and a really good one, not those ones that, you know, the actually not there for the kids. Yeah, I know I've been there. I've been talking to them, to those people, but nothing have been done. I don't know if it's still happening, but nothing have been done from now, or yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Melanie. We'll go next with Graham Nickerson, please.
I'd like to echo the sentiments already expressed. I think we need to have access to a level of power. We have now, I mean, collectively with the large Black immigrant community, it's the old arguments of, oh, there's such a small number of Black people in the community, we don't have the people to represent, either mandate or the people to actually be on these committees or in groups or to consult with. It's obvious that we do have that gravity now, and there really isn't a very good excuse. And I think this particular presentation has shown that things that were happening 60 years ago, 50 years ago are still happening. And it's time that they have to change, and we need the commitment and the resources to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Graham. We'll go with Francine.
De mon côté, ce que je trouve que les décideurs peuvent agir sur ce point-là pour le changement, je demanderai aux décideurs de voir comment impliquer d'autres races dans les systèmes d'éducation et qu'il y ait quand même certain nombre d'enseignants qui peuvent aider à combattre ces racismes et ces discriminations, et que les élèves aussi se sentent qu'ils sont représentés, que ces élèves se sentent qu'il y a quelqu'un qui est impliqué et qui peuvent maintenant représenter leur sort et qui peut combattre pour eux, surtout dans des écoles et partout où sont les élèves, parce que c'était le cadre des élèves, pour ne plus parler du dehors. Parce que même quand les enfants, quand ils sont en train d'appliquer ils sont dans les classes de 12e année, il y a des fois que les universités ou bien les collèges demandent aux enfants qu'il y a des enseignants, ce sont des directeurs ou quoi, qui doivent aussi participer à leur application. Il y a des enseignants qui refusent. Ils te disent, OK, attends, je le ferai. Et le temps passe. C'est l'exemple de ma fille. Le représentant de l'école refusait de l'aider. Mais elle s'est débrouillée dans ces manières. Elle est parvenue à appliquer, on l'avait accepté à l'université, jusqu'à ce qu'on avait envoyé le message à l'école. Le directeur était un peu surpris. Oh, tu as fait ça comment? Qui t'a montré? Je savais que tu étais incapable de le faire. Tu vois, tout ça, ce sont les façons de saboter, de dénigrer quelqu'un. Tu es incapable. Toujours, tu es incapable. Mais il faut qu'il y ait quand même une représentation et que les enfants se sentent qu'ils sont aussi impliqués. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Francine. We'll go to Ivan, please.
Yes, thank you. When I started out the meeting, I mentioned that there are a few doors open. And again, I'm an educator. I've been a teacher and a principal, school principal, and my role now as a director of education. So I've been in education for a long time, ever since my mother took me to kindergarten and left me there. She hasn't come back to get me. So I want to say again, like the long-term strategy to educate racism out of the system. It's a long-term thing, and yes, they're listening to the panelists here that there's a lot of things that they want done now, you know, and as a First Nation community, we've been very patient and impatient for the number of years that we've experienced systemic racism. But with the TRC just behind me here, one of the books there is missing for Indian children, missing First Nation children, and unmarked graves. And to a lot of the people across the country, that's just one of the texts. It didn't mean anything until they started finding unmarked graves and missing children. And now it's a big issue. So, you know, for me, like in our Rexton area, our Rexton area is just our neighboring non-First Nation communities. We would call it town. Rexton area, they have the high school, middle school, and the elementary school. And we have a band-operated school here in Elizabeth. So those doors that are opening up because of the TRC, the national rollout of the recommendations and calls to action. Those things has opened up a little bit in those schools in terms of addressing First Nations, making those kids feel that attend there. Like when I started out, I said that we never felt welcome there. Now, those schools there, according to the perception of the parents, a lot of the kids don't feel welcome there as well. We have about 300 kids in our school, and about 150 by parental choice will attend those schools. The high school kids attend here too. But for those years, you could go to the high school, which is 50% First Nation from Elizabeth, and you go in there and you wouldn't see anything that will identify it as having First Nation students in that high school. But now we're starting to change these things. And now 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would not hear of the Rexton Elementary School inviting First Nation elders to have a ceremony, to have smudging, to have chanters, to have drumming, to have singing in Mi'kmaq of the old Canada, singing in Mi'kmaq, the raising up the Mi'kmaq flag outside those 3 schools. So those things are beginning to open up. And just the impact that it has had is one of the kids that was a non-First Nation kid that was the parents were called with the neighboring communities here that Elizabeth has always had race relationships with. And one of those kids that was a great elementary school kid, parents pick up the kid and because the kid has to go home for whatever reason early. And the parent asked the kid, why do I have to drive you home early today? Why does the school have to call me? So the kid is very quiet. But eventually the kid, when asked a couple times, the kids finally said to his dad, I just need my smudging, which is a ceremony that the First Nation communities have brought to that school, not just to First Nation kids, but to all the kids at that school. And the impact that the smudging ceremony has had on that kid, the impact of how the smudging ceremony was explained to that kid about calmness, about quieting the mind and your emotions and all that. That was the elder explaining that to those kids. So the kid had a real impact on that kid. No doubt about it. We don't know the other impacts our ceremony and our First Nation ways, our worldviews is having on those schools. Those 3 schools now are having a lot more of these First Nation ceremonies within them. But the parent that is driving home that kid asks the school, what is it what are you teaching our kids, where they come back and say, we've seen a shell dancer there, we had drumming. And that's the prejudices that are out there outside the school, the parents that have not been educated properly. So about First Nation history and contribution. So that's what I'd like to see. And it's a real pet peeve of mine is to have the leadership of the province, the government, the premier of the province to stand up at a state of the province address in any time now in February and say to the province that we are committed to First Nation education long term. You're going to have your kids come home and they're going to talk about things about First Nation issues. So we got to prepare you as parents. You have to know that our community, our government is committed to First Nation education. We're going to implement these programs. Kids, we're going to be teaching these kids proper history, ceremony, First Nations way of life, First Nations world view. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see acknowledgement by government that these things are going to happen. And it's not just to our First Nation community, not just to the schools, but to the citizens of the province. Prepare them, because they're the ones that are ignorant. They have never been given proper education. That's what has been perpetuating the systemic racism for years and years and years, because no one has had challenged it. No one has said to the parents that these things are going to be happening. And again, I go back to my long-term approach to educating systemic racism out of the system. Educate kids properly, and you will have a generation of kids properly educated in First Nation ways of life. Black history. I never learned Black history in school. Never, ever. I never even learned my own history in school. And we were there, but in order for us to make a significant change, government has to step up. Federal government has stepped up to a certain extent right now by the TRC, and Jordan's principle was mentioned. Those are a lot of acknowledgements right now of the First Nation issue across the country. Residential schools, teach those in your school. Teach the kids what actually happened in those days, because those residential school authors 150, 200 years ago had great foresight. Those authors, those people that put those in place, said that we will destroy the Mi'kmaq family. We'll destroy the Mi'kmaq family now by taking their children away, and we'll see the effects of that in 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And that's what our communities are struggling with right now, the destruction of the family. And those things we want to rebuild back. And part of the way of doing it is by educating the racism out of the education system of the province, out of the education system in Nova Scotia, across the education system across the country.
Thank you, Ivan Agustin. We'll go to Raymond Times, and just want to remind all our panelists we're short in time. We are in 4:25 right now. So we'll go with Raymond Times, and then we'll dive into question and answer, a few question and answers with the remaining time. Thank you.
Well, I'll make sure I speak faster this time, but
no, take your time.
We got to go back to, the question is, what can we, one thing today, one thing. Well, it's got to be more than one thing. I remember how I got involved, especially in the political side, school boards and whatever. I was over on the golf course, and this white gentleman came over to me. He was one of the most powerful people in town of Truro, but he was friends with everybody. And again, I remember saying earlier, not all white people are our enemies. But he come over and he said, "It's time for times." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" "It's time for you to get involved in politics." I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a lot of stuff going on, and you got to get involved." I said, "Wow." He was playing with 3 other golfers. So I'd say the 4 richest people in town of Truro. But they came to me and said, "It's time." So I got involved. I've had doors slammed in my face, called the N-word, chased by dogs in the middle of winter. Election came. I had to go to Supreme Court in order to get my seat, because the mayor, who's still the mayor here today, was getting people from other areas to come in and vote against me. Got all that straightened out, ran again. That same mayor had to swear me in. So about 6 months into my first term, I went to this businessman. I said, "Man, I thought you said it was time for times." I said, "You didn't tell me I was going to have to go through all this stuff." He said, "Look, I got money. My friends got money. We could throw money at this. We white people can. Okay? But it's not going to change nothing. We wanted somebody, nobody expected you to have all the answers, but we wanted somebody who wasn't afraid to stand up and fight. And then when you do achieve something, you take ownership of it. Because if it's just given to you or offered to you, if it works, fine. If it don't work, you just move on. I wanted to say that really quickly, okay? But I say that because we need to change our own mindset of just asking others to do something for us. We got to change that, okay? We got to start getting involved at the PTAs, the boards, and the commissions, instead of asking others to go in there and make change for us. Because that's where the real change is made, in those back rooms. And we can pound the desk and make sure our voices are heard, instead of just asking others to do for us, because that's that colonial way of thinking. We're asking for handouts. We got to stop that. There's that old saying that's been mentioned about the racial, calling the racial slurs against First Nations, Black kids, and other cultures and that. Sticks and stones will break your bones, somebody said, but names will never hurt you. How many of you heard that from teachers and whatever?
Yeah.
Well, they told us a lie, okay? You break a bone, it heals, move on. When you call names, it stays there because nobody has helped you heal from it. That's why we're in some of the situation we're in today. Here in Nova Scotia, they just passed, they're debating a bill. I think it's called C12, 112 or 12 or something like that, where it says hate should be a federal crime, not just a human rights case, because if it's just somebody calls you the N-word or whatever racial slur, the police can't really do anything about it because it's not a hate crime. It's a human rights thing. So you got to go and do your thing on that. New Brunswick, they just appointed a commissioner on systemic racism. Well, I hope that Mrs. Varma gets out there and talks to everybody, and the recommendations that she makes based on her conversations. Again, our leaders heed to that, okay? Now, and I'm going to make this very quick because I know we're getting short on time. Back in 1991, a young man was asked that applied for a job. How are you going to handle the racial slurs? A job for the fire department. And the young man said, geez, I don't think anybody's going to worry about the color of my skin when their house is on fire. And you can relate to this in what we're talking about here. And the man said, no, we're not talking about the people's house on fire. We're talking about the people you got to work with. And the young man said, well, no, that's not going to be my problem. That's going to be your problem. Well, that young man didn't get the job, filed a human rights complaint. That young man was me, by the way, okay? The same mayor who had to swear me in was the one that asked me that question back in 1991. I wanted 5 things out of it. And this is going to be very important for you to understand when you say, what can we do to move forward? I just changed a couple little things and I'm going to paraphrase a bit, okay? The 5 things I wanted was, and here's what we want. We want the Department of Education, the province of New Brunswick, to enter into negotiations, okay, with a view to establish an affirmative action program, give a specific time. And you can even include the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission involved in this, because we're talking about human rights. And then the parties agreed to establish a review committee to investigate and report all hiring practices that are under the direct control of the federal government, in this case, Department of Education. That's going to be a big key too, because the government has the power. And then the next thing, and I really, these were this is what I wanted in terms for my settlement. The third thing was that, and I'm going to change the name. The Department of Education of New Brunswick agrees to encourage Black and visible minority members of communities to serve on committees under which they have the control. specifically, and you name your specific ones. And then the fourth one was subject to contractual obligations with its unionized employees. So when you're dealing with a union, you got to make sure that their policies and that line up with what we're trying to do, which includes us, because a lot of them, some of them have it on paper, but they don't mean nothing either, because they all have ways of trying to exclude us. The fifth one, and I'm almost done here, okay, I didn't know it at the time representing myself, but I was the one to set the precedence for all human rights cases in Canada that awarded general damages on top of lost wages or compensation for lost wages. I didn't know I was setting a precedent-setting case for across Canada. That was back in 1991. If I could get my hands on 5% of everybody's general damages, I wouldn't even be sitting here talking to you. I'd be on my own island someplace like some of the billionaires. But we need to be at the table, okay? Again, if we're gonna ask, we're not asking with our hands out begging, okay? We're demanding action. I mean, we keep asking. I want action, okay? I want a strategy. I want action, and I want measurable outcomes sooner than later. That's what we got to ask for. And I think I'll just leave it at that. I hope I wasn't boring any of you, but I think it's important. Like, some call me an activist, some call me a troublemaker or whatever. I don't care what room I'm in, I call it the way I see it. And again, we all may come here, the old saying goes, Martin Luther King said it, we may have come in different boats, but we're all in the same boat now. So we want equity and equality. Judge me not on the color of my skin, but my aptitude and my attitude. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay?
Thank you, Raymond Times. Really appreciated the points. That was powerful. Think we ran out of time. We won't be able to, we'll try to see if we can be able to get to some of Q&A, but Marie?
Can I proceed with le mot de la fin?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Premièrement, j'aimerais remercier tous nos panélistes. I'd like to thank all our panelists for sharing your experience today with us. Nos partenaires de l'événement, NB, New Brunswick African Association and Battle of the Arts NB, notre interprète Yolande Chiasson, l'équipe de Dialogue NB pour modérer ce webinaire, Facebook et Twitter, la télé Rogers pour l'enregistrement et la diffusion, puis finalement nos participants et les téléspectateurs sur Facebook ou Rogers. Merci à vous tous. Merci. Thank you. Welalin, Weliwan.
Thank you, Cherry. And I will say again, thank you to all our panelists, our guests watching us from Facebook and Instagram Live. Thank you all for sharing with us your experience here today. I knew some people are joining us from Toronto. So thank you again, Mr. Times, Ivan, Graham. We would like to continue this discussion. You guys in academia and the historians, we would like to educate our communities in about our history going forward and hold the teachers accountable, hold the system accountable moving forward. And it's time for action, as Mr. Raymond just closed it up there. And what Melanie, Mama Francine was mentioning, you know, we've been talking, going to school or parents and teachers meeting or walking or marching on the street, but it's time for action. We're in 2022, things need to change and we're not asking for it, we're demanding. So again, thank you.